Just 5 minutes ago, everything changed for Sarah Ferguson, and almost nobody understands why. One moment, she was quietly living her life on the fringes of the royal world she once helped define. The next, the palace released a cold, carefully engineered message that sent shockwaves through insiders and left millions of people scrambling for answers. It wasn't dramatic on the surface. No flashing lights, no emergency broadcast. But for those who know how the monarchy communicates, this was the equivalent of pulling a fire alarm behind velvet curtains. And here's the part the public hasn't fully grasped. Sarah Ferguson didn't simply step back. She was quietly pushed into a corner. And the timing wasn't random. Behind that brief announcement was a decision that insiders say has been building in private strategy rooms for months. A decision tied to political pressure, resurfacing scandals, financial concerns, and the shifting power dynamic inside a modern monarchy desperate to avoid another public crisis. The truth is, the clock didn't start ticking today. It's been ticking for years, but only now has it exploded into the open. And as we pull apart the layers behind this sudden break, you'll see that this moment is more than a royal update. It's the start of a new fight for identity, legacy, and survival. And Sarah Ferguson is right in the center of it. What made today's announcement so unsettling wasn't what it said, it was what it didn't. The palace released a short, polished statement that looked harmless on the surface, the kind of neatly packaged update the institution uses when it wants to pretend nothing unusual is happening. But the moment it dropped, people who follow royal communication instantly recognized the tone. It had that same tight, careful wording they've used during moments when they'd rather downplay internal tension than confront it. And that's exactly why Sarah Ferguson's name being included raised eyebrows everywhere. This wasn't a birthday acknowledgement or a gentle family announcement. It was an abrupt repositioning, presented as routine, but framed just vaguely enough that it hinted at something happening behind the scenes. Insiders immediately noticed how the palace avoided addressing the real context. Instead, they wrapped it in vague language about adjustments and focus, which usually signals that conversations have been happening privately. Conversations Sarah hasn't been allowed to control. This in itself isn't random. For months, royal commentators have quietly pointed out that Sarah's presence in certain events seemed inconsistent. Sometimes she was invited, other times she was conspicuously absent. Each time, explanations varied. Scheduling conflicts, health matters, logistics. But now, after this sudden shift, those earlier absences seem less like coincidences and more like a slow distancing effort. One that today finally crossed the line from silent to official. But if this statement marked the public beginning, the roots go much deeper. Because the truth is, Sarah's relationship with the institution has always lived in a strange gray zone. And today's move might just be the palace's attempt to redraw that line permanently. And as we uncover what happened next, it becomes clear this wasn't an isolated decision. It was part of a bigger strategy. And the first clue lies in the one thing the palace hoped people wouldn't notice. Of course, when something sudden happens in the royal world, people start digging. And this time, they didn't have to dig far. Almost immediately after the announcement, older controversies involving Sarah began trending again. Not because she did anything new, but because the timing felt too strategic to ignore. It's as if the moment the palace tried to push her into the background, the internet did the opposite and dragged her whole history back into the spotlight. And that's where the second layer of this story reveals itself. The royal institution has always been extremely sensitive about optics. When older rumors or embarrassing headlines start resurfacing online, the palace typically acts fast to distance itself from anything that could cause fresh complications. Over the last year, whispers online have pointed out that some of Sarah's past dealings, especially certain financial mishaps and questionable partnerships, were once again circulating in royal forums. Nothing newly confirmed, nothing proven, but enough chatter to make advisors nervous. Reports claim that the palace has been quietly tracking the rise in online speculation, not because they believe every rumor, but because public perception matters more now than ever. And when a royal figure's past starts trending again, even for reasons beyond their control, the institution tends to respond the only way it knows how, by tightening its circle. And here's where things connect. The timing of today's announcement overlaps almost perfectly with an uptick in online debates about Sarah's history, including some resurfaced allegations from years ago that fans still argue about. None of it is new, but the palace doesn't care whether something is old. They care whether it's loud, and right now, that noise has been growing. Which leads us to the next unsettling question. If the palace was worried about optics, what changed inside the family to make this the moment they finally acted? The answer starts revealing itself when you look at the shifting dynamics inside the core family. Because, whether the palace admits it or not, power is changing hands faster than the public realizes. Over the past year, senior roles have quietly shifted as certain family members have stepped back for health reasons. Others have taken on new responsibilities, and the workload of the monarchy has concentrated around fewer individuals. And with fewer people carrying more weight, the institution has become hyper-protective about anything that could disrupt stability. According to insiders, major decisions are now influenced by a much smaller, more cautious inner circle, one focused on cutting loose ends rather than managing them. And unfortunately for Sarah Ferguson, she has spent decades in that uncomfortable category, where she's close enough to matter, but far enough to be considered a liability. When internal power shifts, priorities change. Suddenly, someone who was tolerated last year becomes a distraction this year. Someone who was allowed to reappear at certain events suddenly gets quietly removed from lists. And in Sarah's case, the new, tighter hierarchy may have decided that any association carrying unpredictable public reaction, even from years-old scandals, was simply no longer worth the risk. But there's another factor, one far more personal. Rumors suggest that certain senior figures expressed concern about the renewed public attention surrounding Sarah's life, especially in online spaces where speculation spreads quickly. This isn't about specific allegations, most of which are unverified or exaggerated, but about the overall unpredictability of her name being in the headlines again. And in a moment where the monarchy is trying to avoid even the slightest hint of instability, unpredictability isn't tolerated. Which brings us to the next twist. Because even though the palace might want to quietly freeze her out, Sarah herself wasn't prepared to fade into the background. And what she did next only made the situation more complicated. Here's where the story takes a turn the palace didn't anticipate. While advisors were attempting to reposition her quietly, Sarah made a move that immediately shifted the public narrative back in her favor. Instead of retreating or staying silent as most royal figures do when tension rises, she became more visible and more vocal in ways that caught the palace off guard. Just days before the announcement, she appeared in a high-profile interview that gained far more traction than anyone expected. It wasn't controversial, it wasn't confrontational, but it was candid enough to remind people why she's always had a strong public following. Her openness, humor, and willingness to talk about real experiences made her relatable in a way the palace often struggles to achieve. And suddenly, the public wasn't criticizing her. They were defending her. And this is where the pressure on the institution increased. Because once Sarah started trending for positive reasons, that momentum clashed directly with whatever quiet distancing plan the palace had in motion. Instead of making her fade out, their statement made her name explode across social platforms. To make matters worse, reports claim that some senior advisors were concerned that Sarah's growing public support could complicate future decisions, especially if she continued to speak openly or release more interviews. The palace prefers voices it can predict, and Sarah has never been predictable. But the most interesting part, her recent appearances weren't random. People close to her suggest she's been working on personal projects that she didn't intend to hide. Books, charity partnerships, behind-the-scenes projects, all of which show she's stepping into her own spotlight, separate from the institution that once tried to control her narrative. And now the question becomes, if the palace pushed her into a corner, did they unintentionally spark a comeback? Because what unfolds next could challenge the very image the monarchy has tried so hard to protect. What became clear over the next few days was something the palace didn't want anyone to talk about. Sarah Ferguson wasn't a problem because of scandals. She was a problem because of her influence. Despite the ups and downs of her past, she remains one of the most recognizable figures connected to the royal family. And she has something the institution desperately struggles with: a natural connection to the public. People don't just watch her, they relate to her. And for an institution that relies on carefully controlled messaging, that kind of independent popularity is risky. This is where the tension sharpens. Sarah has built a reputation for being open, unfiltered, and surprisingly normal for someone who once lived inside the strictest royal machinery in the world. When she speaks, people listen out of genuine interest, not formality. And lately, her voice has been getting louder, not through drama, but through her growing presence in media, her charity work, and her new public projects that have been gaining traction. Reports claim that some inside the palace felt her rising visibility could create confusion about her place within the royal structure. After all, she's not a working royal, yet she draws more attention than some who are. And when an institution relies on hierarchy and clarity, that imbalance starts to look like a threat to the narrative they carefully maintain. But the most revealing clue came from insiders who mentioned that discussions about public alignment had taken place, a phrase that usually signals concerns about someone overshadowing or interfering with official messaging. Think of it like this. In a moment when senior royals are dealing with personal challenges and public pressure, any unexpected shift in public attention can disrupt the fragile balance they're trying to protect. And the palace knew that the more Sarah spoke publicly, the less control they had. This growing tension set the stage for a bold and unexpected gamble, one that rewrote everything that happened next. The palace's biggest mistake wasn't the announcement itself. It was underestimating how the public would react to it. They expected a quiet adjustment, a simple shift in narrative that would pass by without much noise. Instead, they opened a door they couldn't close. Within hours, social media erupted with questions, theories, and frustration. People weren't confused. They were suspicious. Viewers pointed out inconsistencies, timelines that didn't add up, and a pattern that looked eerily similar to how the palace has treated other figures in the past when trying to quietly move them aside. The announcement, meant to control the narrative, ended up igniting it. And Sarah, without saying a word, became the center of a conversation the palace had desperately hoped to avoid. But here's what made the situation escalate even further. Fans began bringing up her recent battles, health issues she handled with strength, personal challenges she managed privately, and her attempts to rebuild her life with transparency. Instead of fading, she looked resilient. Instead of shrinking, she appeared stronger than she had in years. And that's when royal commentators began discussing something the palace didn't want highlighted: the possibility that the institution had misread public sentiment. They expected criticism. They got sympathy. They expected distance. They got engagement. They expected control. They got chaos. Rumors suggest that internal advisors were caught off guard by how quickly the narrative spiraled. And when the institution senses a loss of control, it usually responds in two ways: doubling down or going silent. This time, they chose silence. And that silence only fueled the storm. Now, the world wasn't just asking what happened. They were asking, why now? What changed? Who made this decision? And why does it feel like something bigger is being hidden behind polite phrases? These questions pushed the situation into territory the palace never wanted to explore. And it all built toward the moment nobody expected next. The twist came when insiders began hinting that today's move wasn't just about Sarah. It was about protecting someone else. And suddenly, everything clicked. The institution has always acted quickly whenever a family member faces pressure, scandal, or renewed speculation, even if it's unverified. When one figure becomes vulnerable, another figure often gets repositioned to redirect attention or protect the core. Rumors online suggest that recent concerns involving another high-profile royal were causing internal tension, with advisors scrambling to maintain stability. No names confirmed, nothing officially acknowledged, but enough whispers to make people wonder whether Sarah's distancing was less about her and more about shielding someone at the center of the monarchy. If that's true, then today's announcement wasn't a punishment, it was a strategic shield. And once people started connecting these dots, the palace's fear became obvious. They didn't want Sarah, with her candid nature and unpredictable openness, to become a magnet for questions that should never be asked. They didn't want her overshadowing headlines, drawing attention toward uncomfortable topics, or becoming the default spokesperson for royal tension. Because the truth is, Sarah doesn't play the palace's game. She tells stories. She makes jokes. She admits mistakes. She's human, and the monarchy doesn't operate well in an environment where humanity overshadows protocol. So distancing her wasn't about harm. It was about control. It was about preventing future chaos, preventing associations they couldn't manage, preventing narratives they couldn't shape. But by trying to protect their image, they accidentally exposed something far more telling. The monarchy is more fragile right now than people realize. And Sarah Ferguson's situation became the unexpected mirror reflecting those cracks. By the time the dust began to settle, one thing was undeniable. Sarah Ferguson's role in the royal story isn't disappearing, it's evolving. The palace may have tried to reposition her quietly, but they underestimated how deeply she's woven into the public's memory. They underestimated how her honesty resonates in a world tired of polished statements. And they underestimated how quickly the narrative would slip out of their hands. Today didn't silence her. It spotlighted her. It didn't erase her influence. It amplified it. And instead of closing her chapter, the palace may have unknowingly set the stage for her next one. Because now, more than ever, People want answers. They want clarity. They want transparency the palace isn't prepared to give. And the more the institution stays silent, the louder the questions grow. Sarah Ferguson didn't ask for this moment, but she's standing in it anyway. And whether the palace intended it or not, they've put her at the center of a conversation that's only beginning. This story isn't ending here. If anything, this is just the start.